There's news in the NFL today, and it's time to break it down in the only way we know how. Hot Route style.
Earl! Johnny!
With our spin on football headlines with a mix of frozen tundras.
Let's be a cold weather team.
Neck rolls.
Boom!
And grass-stained jerseys.
The good old-fashioned guts was probably the biggest difference in the game.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to the Hot Routes live show, a very special Black Friday edition, joined as always by Matthew Coller. How was your Thanksgiving, Matthew? Was it delightful?
No, it was horrible because the football games were atrocious. And I know, we're going to hear all about it. You're very excited about the way that Jordan Love played. But as an objective observer that just wanted a good football game, Jared Goff and his ability against pressure robbed me of that. And then after that, Jim Nantz was trying so hard in the first game to make Sam Howell a thing. And I appreciate that as a Sam Howell respecter, but then it just got completely out of hand. And wow, 7 weeks too late, Jack Del Rio was fired today. So there's a thing. And the night game, again, just the San Francisco 49ers playing on a totally different level than pretty much everybody else in the NFC. That was painful to watch as well. So I hoped, maybe Black Friday will be better. It wasn't better. It was actually much worse unless you watched Nebraska and Iowa. Then you laughed until your chest hurt. So that was the recap. My wife is actually away out of town broadcasting a game for Big Ten Network. So I just ate leftovers alone. And that's my Thanksgiving. Alone and bad football. Not a great time.
Well, hopefully your wife gets a little bit of a better game here tonight than we got this afternoon. Great transition to what is going to be our first topic. I do want to talk about whatever the hell that was we just watched. I have a few thoughts on it. My first thought is I'm done with the Jets, canceling them for the season. If I was the commissioner of the NFL, everybody gets for the Madden people out there, everybody gets a forced win when you play the Jets. We're going to save whoever you're playing. You don't have to get hurt. You're going to win every game 14-6 because we know that's probably what the game was going to be. As fun as that Jets defense is to watch, it is not only is it an unwatchable product with Tim Boyle, which I mean seriously, Zach Wilson would have done better than that. As bad as Zach Wilson has been, that was pathetic. You were talking about before the show, like how did this team not go get a Josh Dobbs, a Brissett, a Dalton, whatever? I mean, this is just throwing the white flag. And then you throw on top of it the fact of what could have been with this team, just completely spiraling after the Aaron Rodgers injury. It's just depressing to watch this team, and I refuse to go on talking about them anymore.
Yeah, I can't remember a team that had as many wins as they've had that felt so hopeless. Like they actually have beaten a couple of good teams and played right to the end with Kansas City, and yet they make me sad about the game of football when they take the field on offense. And the Tim Boyle thing and the Zach Wilson thing are so baffling. Like we already knew exactly what Zach Wilson looked like playing quarterback. There was no reason to ever think he would be different. One thing I enjoyed was broadcasts being like, he's been mentored by Aaron Rodgers, so watch him now. And it would just be another terrible interception. Like, I don't think that was really the problem. I think he's just a massive bust, and it is what it is. They have Trevor Siemian on the team, who once won some games with the Denver Broncos and made the New Orleans Saints fairly serviceable for a little while, although I remember quite a bad Thanksgiving game from Trevor Siemian. But the guys at least played NFL football before, and they made no effort. Having known their quarterback was out since the first play, basically, of the season, had made no effort to go get anybody else. That to me is where it's particularly wild. And Aaron Rodgers keeps telling everybody, yeah, I'm coming back. And of course, now there's no reason to. But with the modern science of the Achilles, It wasn't the craziest thing that ever could have happened to get hurt at the beginning of the season and come back. Cam Akers did it in 2021, coming back in the playoffs with that defense, with those weapons. I'm sitting here watching Josh Dobbs with a good defense and good weapons. And the difference might be good coaching, which the Vikings have and the Jets clearly don't on offense. Shocked that Nate Hackett is not a good coach on offense, but someone could have allowed them to survive who could actually be a starter in the league. And it just is astounding to me that they wouldn't make any effort to bring in somebody else. And then you end up with Tim Boyle, and everybody's tweeting his college stats, but that's about what it looked like as a guy who wasn't even good in college. So I don't know. I don't understand that situation at all.
It's funny because today, all of a sudden, Packers fans were like digging up a 9-month-old tweet of mine where I was saying that Joe Douglas is a much better GM than Brian Gutekunst. And when you look at what has happened with Joe Douglas really since that tweet, because that was basically right when they had made the trade to get Rodgers. So they had already done the Alan Lazard signing, which is a complete disaster. Not only signing him to begin with, but to give him the amount of money right out the gate in free agency is just brutal. Like, nobody was watching his film and saying, we got to give him 4 years, $40 million. Like, you want to bring him in to be with Aaron Rodgers, that's fine. But to rush to the table and give him that contract, I did not like their draft either. They spent their 15th overall pick on like a number 7 edge rusher. Why was that not an offensive lineman or a wide receiver or a tight end like Dalton Kincaid, something like that, another playmaker? And then the quarterback situation that you just mentioned, it's inexcusable. It's inexcusable. He's known as being a guy that is a little bit bullish on his guys. Like us draft people on Twitter get crap all the time because it's like, you won't give up on your draft takes. Well, Douglas is like the living embodiment of that in the NFL, because like he'll stand by Zach Wilson. Apparently he's like been like dying on the Mekhi Becton hill inside that building. So it's definitely been a loss of, I'll put it this way, the luster of that 2022 draft where he got Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner and Breece Hall and all those guys, the luster of that is gone. He has not done a good job running this. Obviously Hackett, you mentioned, leadership structure there is really has been exposed this season, which I suppose is not a surprise for the Jets. I do want to talk about the Dolphins a little bit. I mean, they were obviously just on autopilot tonight. I don't really have any major takeaways from them. It was looking like the Jets defense was maybe going to do what they've done all year and force the worst start out of the opposing quarterback yet again. Tua was doing essentially nothing in this game, threw 2 ugly interceptions in the first half, throws his second interception right before half that kind of got the Jets set up for a Hail Mary attempt. And then we also saw what happened. Tim Boyle throws it a little bit short, and Holland houses it for 98 yards. But I continue to just be a little bit worried about Tua. I was really impressed by him in the first like 8 weeks of the season or so. But I do think the league is catching up a little bit to some of the schematic stuff that they're doing. And it's I think exposing Tua a little bit. I mean, he has really made some ugly throws in the last couple of weeks. And I know Dolphins are tired of me saying this. In fact, I just saw our viewer count go down by like 3 as I was saying this. So it's probably all Dolphins fans. But the reality is, I just don't trust that this is a quarterback that can string together 3 or 4 steady performances without some of these ugly reads and ugly throws. And this week was definitely not anything in the right direction there for Tua. So I'm a little bit worried there. And then, of course, the brutal injury for Jalen Phillips at the end of this game, a player that had to retire in college, was like the #1 recruit, amazing edge rusher at UCLA, had to retire, came out of retirement, killed it at Miami, became a first-round pick. But there were some questions about, durability and sustainability. And I don't want to jump to conclusions on anything, but that just all crept back into my mind. Like, how devastating could this be? It sounds like it could be an ankle injury. I don't know. It all happened pretty fast. So I'm praying for Jalen Phillips that this is not really anything to do with the issues he dealt with back in college and can get back. But that's a huge blow for the Dolphins defense too. He was coming on late, and they go from having a dynamic duo of Phillips and Chubb to now Chubb and Christian Wilkins kind of got to carry the load there. So that's a huge hit for their defense. I didn't walk away feeling better about either of these teams in this game.
Phillips is a huge hit, and I saw the words torn Achilles in the comment section. I was going to say that if I saw that correctly, but that would mean his season is over, and that is terrible for him, terrible for them and their defense. To your point, one thing that I always wonder about with certain coaches is that the NFL is amazing at fixing problems. So just take whatever. I mean, it's surprising that they haven't fixed stopping the tush push against Philadelphia, but against everybody else, they've seemed to find out ways to stop that. The Wildcat back in the day, these are extreme examples, but even go a couple years back, everybody's running these play action boots where the wide zone goes this way and everybody boots out. Then the NFL says, yeah, and you know what? We're going to send our edge rusher upfield right at your quarterback, and then bam, those go away. And with a lot of the motions and everything else, that everybody in the league sees that happening. They know it's going to be copied, and those defensive coaches, they're getting in the lab and saying, all right, how can we create rules for our players? And the number of things that NFL defensive players are able to put on their shoulders to be able to handle with different rules, different assignments, everything else is really incredible. But you see this all the time. Like even Denver's got a good defense now. They were an atrocity like 6 weeks ago, but that's what coaches are able to do in the league. And I think this happened a couple times with Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona, where he came out of the gate with a lot of good ideas and a lot of good stuff, but then never changed it. And as the season went along, the opponents just started to figure these things out. They started to create rules for it, and they were able to solve a lot of those problems. And I think that there's too much talent on Miami for it to go as extreme as it did in Arizona a few times between first 8 to 10 weeks and then completely fall off the edge of the earth. But also, and I'm not saying that Mike McDaniel is a gimmick or something, but when you do have something like totally different and it catches people by surprise, you have to know they're going to catch up, and you have to have a counterpunch off of that, which I think the best coaches are able to do that throughout a season. I also think the best coaches have their staples that work against pretty much anything that they can continue to go back to and back to and back to. And Miami down the stretch, one of their biggest goals is going to have to be to find those staples that are beyond just, well, they didn't cover this guy or that guy on a motion, he's wide open, or they just ran a little jet sweep and the guy's running for 30 yards. Can't really expect that to happen on a week-to-week basis. So that to me is a big question and a big test for Mike McDaniel.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen that before. I feel like Sean McVay faced this a few years ago, and it's not a knock on the coach. Like it's incredible that he labbed it away in the summer and came up with this offense and took the league by storm. But it's a lot harder to come up with something new in the middle of the season. So once you rip away the schematic genius, you go from the X's and O's aren't winning for you. So can the Jimmies and Joes win? That's just a whole different conversation. So it's definitely an adjustment for Miami. And that's why that Jalen Phillips injury is so big, because it felt like, well, at least that defense was catching up. Jalen Phillips emerging the last couple of weeks was a big part of that. So it's just an absolutely brutal day for both parties. Last comment. Al Michaels is loose, man. I love it. I feel like he's entering the I don't really give a crap stage of his career a little bit. I still think he's doing a good job and all that. But today he was saying like Tyreek Hill got married and he tossed the ball to a fan in the stands. It was a woman and she like blew a kiss at him, and Al's like, Tyreek Hill got married this weekend. I hope that's his wife. And I'm almost positive last week they were promoting like James Bond, like a living James Bond experience in Las Vegas. And it was like, you get to be James Bond and, you get the whole virtual experience. And chat, let me know if I heard this right, because I never found it on Twitter or anything, but I'm almost positive he said, does that include the James Bond girls experience? So I'm loving Al Michaels on these Thursday night broadcasts for sure.
Something about Al Michaels is that I think the best broadcast team ever, of course, is Madden and Summerall. That's hard to dispute. But right up there is Al and Frank and Dan Monday Night Football. They had a run in the early '90s, and people older than me would probably say it was, Don Meredith and Howard Cosell and so forth. So it depends on when you grew up and everything else and when you watched it. But one of the things that they would do is they would joke around through the whole thing. They would bust each other's balls. They would be funny. They would be cracking jokes. And I don't know that there's been a partner for Al Michaels that played off that. Like him and Chris Collinsworth were a tremendous, tremendous duo. The internet hates every broadcaster all the time, so I don't pay attention to too much of that criticism, but just a great duo for a really, really long time on the best broadcast in football. But Al was not really using that muscle as much, like, as Collinsworth is such a focused football guy. And I feel like with Herbstreit, and I don't know why this is that he feels this way. Maybe Herbstreit is a funny guy too. I don't know. But he has just been totally willing to bring that back out, how funny he can be. It might be just in part because the football is usually so bad that's in front of him. He's just like, I don't even care. I'm going to make this a show. There's people watching that want to have some fun here. He's been doing this the whole time. He also might think it's just an internet broadcast. I can do whatever I want. I'm not sure. Or he's done so much in his career. He's such a legend that he just is like, I'm going to make my jokes and who cares? But it has been the only part of a lot of those broadcasts that have been good because the football is not. And of course, if you've watched the Prime Vision, I don't know if you've seen a whole lot of that, but it's really fascinating. All the data and everything else. You got to be a little bit on the nerd side to watch it, but it's incredible what they've done on that side. But I'm with you. I think that Amazon has done a really great job with this broadcast overall.
Yeah, I will say I could do without the interjections. The guy that comes in, he's one of the producers, and I'm sure he's really good with the stats and stuff. I think he's a big part of the production side of things. But I feel like the people that watch the Prime Vision are very educated football fans, and he comes in and he's like, when Josh Jacobs breaks 6 tackles, that's really good for the offense. And I'm like, I mean, I could use a little bit more than some of the analysis he's bringing to the table. If you're going to cut off Al and Herbstreit, I need a little bit up. So there's a little feedback for Amazon there, but I'm really excited for this next topic. I thought about this earlier in the week, and it really is perfect to be able to do this here on Black Friday. This was a shout out to some of my patrons. Were like, can you highlight some of the budget contracts in the NFL? And what a better time to do that here on Black Friday when everybody's got products on sale and everything. So the way I want to do this is we're going to build, we have already built 2 separate rosters of 1 quarterback, 1 running back, a wide receiver, tight end, 1 offensive lineman, 1 defensive lineman, 1 linebacker, and 1 defensive back. And we have to stay under $80 million of current year cap hit, which I don't know about you. I had a ton of fun putting this team together. I don't know how should we do this? Just go position by position, or
why don't we just go position? Yeah, why don't we just go position by position and talk about who we had? At the very end, it was a little bit of a struggle to stay under 80 million, and you'll see why. But this was fun. The one thing is, what you could tell by doing this exercise is there's a lot of funny money in the NFL that is pushed around all over the place.
Yes.
And the players that we were able to put on teams whose cap hits are shockingly low, you're like, how did they do that? Where is that money? What void year is that getting paid off for? So why don't you start out with quarterback, and then we can just run down the whole thing.
Okay. So, I went at a couple different angles on this. And the other rule is no rookie contracts, by the way. That's, rookie contracts are obviously the most valuable thing really in the league. So no rookie contracts. But I went at quarterback with Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the NFL. I just felt like the gap between his contract this year, he's a $37 million cap hit. And what? Jimmy Garoppolo, Geno Smith, like some of the more budget friendly veteran contracts, the gap just cannot justify the value there. And you look at Patrick Mahomes' contract, this is a convenient year to do this exercise because this year he is at $37 million. So just about half of my cap hit here in this exercise, which is a lot, but when we set it to 80 million, it was going to be a lot for the quarterback either way. But it's an extremely flexible contract down the road too. If you're not just talking about this year, you've got just the money can be moved all over the place. Like he's going to have the normal cap hits of 55, 60 million, which is like market level for the top quarterback in the league over the next 3 or 4 years. But then it goes back down to 28, 29, and they haven't really had to play with it too much. So you really can just, they can look at it, say, is this a real championship window? Do we need to take 20 million of Pat's money and put it 2 years from now with a void year or whatever? And, that'll allow us to sign a DeAndre Hopkins or whatever it might be. It is an extremely team-friendly contract. I felt like that was, from a value perspective, the best way to go about this.
So I thought that you might go a different direction and pick like Kyler Murray, because I know you're a Kyler Murray guy. And, okay, throw the ACL injury out, and a $16 million cap hit for this year is a pretty darn good budget. Joe Burrow's only at 19 million. Matthew Stafford, 20 million. If he's healthy, that's pretty good. Josh Allen at 18. But I also went Patrick Mahomes. Look, I mean, when you compare what he's actually worth, and I know what we're going to get is, but guys, his receivers have dropped some footballs. I know. And every quarterback, whether it's Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, whatever, has had a year where his team around him is not as good and they're still great and everything. We're talking about the quarterback with possibly the greatest start to a career in history. And his cap hit is $1 million more than Ryan Tannehill. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, look, the best budget here of a guy who's not on a rookie contract is probably Josh Allen. He is, in my mind, the number 2 quarterback in the NFL, and it's $18 million. And I can switch it on the fly if we want to do that. Why don't we do this? I'm going to add about $20 million to my cap hit, and I will go with Josh Allen, just so we're not playing the same exact game here. And on the fly, I'll make a switch. I'll tell you who I had and then who I could potentially get in the difference between Mahomes and Josh Allen. But it's
Sure.
hard. Like 37 is just not that bad. So yes, give me the greatest quarterback in football. Thank you.
Yeah, that's funny. We both arrived at the same decision there. Yeah, I'm curious how many we have that are the same, because I felt like there was a couple obvious ones. Once you saw it, you're like, oh yes, please. And that was this next position at running back. Raheem Mostert at $2.2 million. I mean, come on. He's been one of the best running backs in the NFL this year. He, before this week, was 4th in the league in missed tackles forced and yards after contact. So it's not just this speedy guy that can hit a lane and have these huge runs, which he still is, but he's added size and durability and a complete package out of nowhere at 31 years old. So they've got a complete value running back there. Not to mention he's still under contract next year at 3.4.
Well, you are getting the Mostert for your money there with him.
Nice.
But I thought there was a more obvious pick, which is somehow Christian McCaffrey's cap hit for this year is 3.4 million. Again, I don't know how.
Wow.
I'm not sure what happened there to allow him to have a $3.4 million cap hit. San Francisco is very much all in on this year, because I'm guessing that one gets a lot harder as it goes forward. And he's also taken a lot of hits this year. 3.4 million, though, the most complete running back in the NFL, kind of defies everything we think about with running backs, where when they made that trade, I was like, I don't know, is it going to be like a Herschel Walker thing where they make a trade for a running back and then he doesn't play or he's bad or whatever? Oh no. He has been a massive, massive difference maker. And, that turns out to be an incredible move by the 49ers front office to get Christian McCaffrey. So 3.4 million, sign me up.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to regret. I'm assuming what you probably did was you sorted it by position and looked for some big names in there. I went the opposite route. I was scrolling through like the PFF grades to find like who are the top guys at each position. Then I was thinking off the top of my head, like who's got good contracts. Probably should have gone the other way on that, but hopefully I still put together a competitive roster here. I have a feeling we might have the same wide receiver here. I have A.J. Brown at $8.56 million this year. I mean, he has been right behind Tyreek Hill, I think, for the best, most impactful receiver in the NFL. His play speaks for itself. And he's signed kind of right before these super wide receiver deals, kind of right before Tyreek and Adams matched the DeAndre Hopkins contract, which we don't need to get into that, but it was a weird time in the wide receiver market. The Eagles jumped in before and got him at 4 years for $100 million. This year, obviously, as I said, at 8.5, just 12 next year, 26 the year after that. Then it does jump up to 40 million. So, that's going to be something. The Eagles in like 3 years, I'm sure they have a plan, but it's like between that and Jalen Hurts, it's going to be really weird. But yeah, A.J. Brown is on an incredibly valuable contract. And the fact that all they had to do is give up the 18th pick in the draft to get that player too. Talk about an incredible trade right there.
And I think what you really see here is, and this goes for just recent years, that front offices have become very good at this. Understanding you have X number of years to win the Super Bowl. And in those X number of years, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 4, whatever, throw everything at it. This is the New Orleans Saints model. We understand that Drew Brees' arm someday will fall directly off of his body. So we are going to pay anyone, move any amount of dollars, no matter what happens, to try to win a Super Bowl. It didn't quite work, but they still had great teams that were this close to getting there in the playoffs. And it was almost like everyone in the rest of the league went, I like that. Like, let's start moving money all over the place and making trades for big receivers and giving them contracts and edge rushers. And then, hey, whatever happens in 3 years with that guy's cap hit, we'll deal with it then. It's now that we're trying to win. So I did have A.J. Brown, but because I created an extra $19 million in cap space for myself, I can up the ante a little bit and go with a $12 million cap hit for Tyreek Hill. Not that I think that Tyreek Hill is wildly better than A.J. Brown. I mean, it's like minuscule, the difference between them. They're both freakishly great wide receivers. They can elevate their quarterbacks. But Tyreek Hill is an explosive play embodied and is as dangerous as any wide receiver, any player in the NFL. He's like if Barry Sanders played wide receiver. So I'll just up my dollars a little bit by about $4 million, and I will take Tyreek Hill.
All right. I love it. Yeah. Tyreek Hill's in my MVP consideration this year. I mean, seriously, he's been just the definition of most valuable player. I can't imagine that offense without him. All right. Tight end. I was really bummed I couldn't fit George Kittle on here because he's got a pretty nice contract given how good of a player he is. It's under 10 million. It's at like 9.8. He signed a 5-year, $75 million contract a while ago. I couldn't quite fit him into my salary cap, but I'm happy to get Dalton Schultz at $2.85 million. He's a fringe top 10 tight end. He's a very good run blocker. He's got incredibly steady hands. He's really good. Like I've always said that he was Jason Witten's replacement in Dallas, and he's never going to have the legacy of Jason Witten, but I mean, just in terms of the consistency and the availability, being that quarterback's best friend. And he's really come on with CJ Stroud. They've started to develop a nice chemistry at just $2.85 million. It was just a 1-year deal. I was so surprised he didn't get a lot of money in a tight end market where you've got, with all due respect to your Vikings, but you got Josh Oliver getting 3 years, $22 million. You got Cole Kmet getting what he got. I'm like, really? Dalton Schultz is way better than those guys. He was open on the wide open market, and Houston was sitting there in like week 2 of free agency, like, yeah, we'll give him to our rookie quarterback. Like, Carolina, where were you? Why are you out here giving a 3-year, $20 million contract to Hayden Hurst? Just brutal. Yeah, Dalton Schultz is a huge value, and he's not the only Houston Texan that I have on this list and considered for this list, by the way. They have some really nice contracts that I'm going to shout out in this exercise. Who'd you have?
They do. Yeah, no, they do. I think that their front office has done a surprisingly good job at building around CJ Stroud so far. Absolutely. Dalton Schultz was in consideration for my pick. I could use some extra cap space to get George Kittle instead of the guy I picked, but I'm going to stick with him. TJ Hawkinson of the Minnesota Vikings. When he signed his deal, there were reports that it was the highest paid tight end deal in the NFL. Now, one, that talk about funny money. I mean, that was like only if he catches, 180 passes and makes 6 Pro Bowls or something. But okay, fine, fair enough. But the structure of that deal has very reasonable cap hits in the first 3 seasons, including only $5 million for this year. He is one of the top receiving targets. And as Justin Jefferson has been out, he has really, really stepped up his game. He's playing through some injuries. He's battling, but he's been an explosive weapon for them, which he really wasn't last year. But he's gone down the field more since Josh Dobbs has been under center. $5 million for a tight end that could lead the league, other than maybe Travis Kelce, but could end up leaving the league in receptions. That's pretty darn good. He's not the blocker that George Kittle is. There's no question about it. That's a huge impact. That's why they signed Josh Oliver. But for $5 million on the salary cap, sign me up. TJ Hawkinson at tight end.
Yeah, that's a great pick. He's been impressive last couple of weeks. No way around it. All right, offensive lineman. I'm curious where you take this one first. I'm curious what you did here.
Okay, well, I went with a guy who plays for a team that doesn't get a whole lot of love, so I understand why he can fly under the radar. But Charles Leno is a pretty good player, and I needed to save money here. I could not go, full left tackle Laramie Tunsil, $26 million cap hit or something.
Yeah.
Or David Bakhtiari. No, wait, he doesn't play, but still has. Sorry, that was rude. That was uncalled for. But Charles Leno. Yeah, Charles Leno, I feel like, is a solid player who's been a little bit overlooked in his career. Not a superstar. He's not, Willie Roaf out there or something, but a solid NFL starting left tackle for a $6.5 million cap hit. Absolutely. Absolutely. When the best players at the position are getting $20 million more and he's very competent, I'll take that.
Nice. Yeah. No, he's one of those guys that, because he wasn't a high draft pick, has always just never gotten the full respect. And in both Chicago and in Washington, their fans hate him because he is a player that when he loses, it's ugly, because one of the reasons he didn't go in the high in the draft was he's got slow feet. So sometimes guys literally will just run around him. He can't catch up. He has some ugly losses from time to time. And fans think, oh my God, he had a horrible game. And it's like, no, it was just one really bad snap. In fact, he was really good the rest of the game. I have always defended Charles Leno when he was a Bear and when he's been in Washington. I have his former teammate, now on the Baltimore Ravens, Morgan Moses, who I was like pounding the table for him being underrated coming into the season. Just a mauler in the run game. I mean, this dude is basically what you wish Orlando Brown was. And the Orlando Brown Jr., not Orlando Brown Sr. But it's all played out so perfectly for Baltimore because they swapped Orlando Brown they moved up like 30 picks in the draft. I think they ended up with Odafe Owe with that pick swap. And then what they did was they signed Morgan Moses from Washington for a 3-year, $15 million contract, which is right in the middle of right now, $5 million a year. And he's been a top 10 right tackle since the second they signed him. One of the best pulling tackles in the league, just deletes dudes on the move. I think he's getting more athletic with age. He's been such a great move for the Baltimore Ravens. So I was happy to get genuinely one of the best right tackles in the NFL at just 5.5.
I think, both of those guys, there's something in common with them, which is sometimes if you just look at PFF scores over a couple of years and you see a guy who's not talked about almost at all, you're like, maybe there's something there. At some point, he'll land at a stop with a good team, and then the broadcast will be like, this underrated tackle. And you're like, he's been good for a while. I don't know what it was. But a lot of times it's because the NFL is so into traits and like, hey, let's make sure that we get, the biggest guys, the fastest guys, all that. But sometimes it's just about not losing that often at the offensive line. And sometimes you can find these kind of gems. I did think about here, though, because I have 15 extra million still from what I saved. 15 extra million. Trent Williams' cap hit's pretty reasonable. And this really shows you the San Francisco 49ers will explode eventually in their salary cap. But I might trade in 6 million here to move up to Trent Williams from Charles Leno. Shout out Charles Leno. You're very good at football, but I'm gonna move that up to Trent Williams and his $12.5 million cap hit. And again, I don't know
I'd
what
say
they
that's
did
fair considering he's arguably the best player in football. Like relative to his position, Trent Williams is absurd. And funny thing, both of our players were on Washington not that long ago. They could have had both of these guys, Morgan Moses and Trent Williams. Nope, they do not. They have some issues. All right, defensive line. I went with Trey Hendrickson, edge rusher for the Cincinnati Bengals. Has been arguably a top tier edge rusher this season. He's blown me away. When they signed him, I was like, I mean, he was a 3 in New Orleans. He was fine. I thought you just paid a backup a bunch of money, whatever. And I was dead ass wrong. He is a hell of a player. He has all of the traits you look for: bend, power, relentlessness, finesse, you name it. All of his metrics are towards the top in the league. And he continues to be a good value. I think he's still under contract for the next 2 years at like 19 and 20. It reminds me a little bit of like that Daniil Hunter contract that the Vikings got away with for all those years. Just incredible value for one of the most game-changing defensive players in football right now.
There was reason to wonder about that based on just on paper what he looked like. It kind of looked like it was an outlier, one-hit wonder type of season, and we've seen that in the NFL blow up on teams. That somebody has one big year, they get a bunch of sacks, and they get paid, and you go like, "Is that really going to work out for you?" And then it doesn't. But in his case, it really did. I went with Jeffrey Simmons at $6.3 million, which he just signed his new contract. And at least for right now, it's pretty good. Another guy that in the future, that will be way, way more expensive for the Titans, and they're going to have to work around it. But as of this moment, Jeffrey Simmons has to be one of the best deals in football. I debated between him and Dexter Lawrence, either or. Neither one is that expensive for this year. But Simmons to me adds, I mean, I don't know. Lawrence did last year, maybe just a little bit more in the pass rush, but I mean, they're both just absolute monsters in the interior of the defensive line. It's hard to find great deals on the edge rushers. Those guys really get paid a lot. So I thought this was kind of the area to find somebody where I needed to save a little bit of cash and also get an all-world player. So I went with Jeffrey Simmons, who's being wasted this year by the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, as is Dexter Lawrence in New York. I wanted to look up Dexter Lawrence's like total money because I feel like he kind of, because did he get paid this offseason or was it middle of last year? Do you know?
I think it was this offseason, right?
Yeah, you might be right. But yeah, he's like a 24 average, which I mean, he's broken out into like, I don't want to quite go like Aaron Donald level, but I know Aaron Donald got like 34 average. And I would at least split the gap between Aaron Donald and Dexter Lawrence. He's been, I mean, he's putting together his own defensive player of the year type of season. I would have loved to gone that route. Or I did want to shout out my guy Rashawn Gary too. I think his contract was pretty friendly for Green Bay. He's like 24 on average. Just had a huge monster game against Detroit. I really think I thought it was going to be closer to 30 than 24 for sure. So that's just another really good contract, I think. Linebacker. This is a homeboy pick, Blake Cashman. This is my other Houston Texans player here. I'm biased because I freaking loved Blake coming out, not just because he played for the Gophers, but I thought he flew around super fast, really heady player, great in coverage. It throws his head in against the run. I had a higher grade on him than I did Devin Bush in that draft, who went in the first round. Looked like a freaking idiot for like 3 years, but to shout out my man Brett Coleman, never wrong, just late, I think, or something like that. That's how I feel on Blake Cashman this year because he's finally stayed healthy. That's why he fell in the draft, was he's got injury issues, and hopefully he can stay healthy. But he is PFF's, I think, 6th graded linebacker in the NFL. He's been all over the field for the Texans, and what's crazy is he wasn't the only Texans linebacker that I thought about for this exercise. They also have Denzel Perriman, on like, I think it's like 2.2 or 1.5, like he was one of the free agent signings of the year where I was like, how is that all that guy gets? Because I've been watching Denzel Perriman for like 5 years. Every time he's out there, I'm like, this dude is a true Mike, really quality player. He's been good for the Texans when he's played, but he has been suspended because he is a bit of a headhunter. I don't even know if that's why he got suspended, but it might have been PEDs or something. But he has been suspended, so that's why I didn't go with him. But yeah, Blake Cashman, had to shout out him at just $1.6 million this year.
So I had Cashman on my list as well, but I also went with initially Levante David, who is not what he used to be. At one time, he's an elite linebacker, but I think he's still pretty darn good. And PFF has him, I think, as like the 34th best linebacker, but his cap hit is only 1.8 million. I was trying to save a ton with this spot because initially I had gone Patrick Mahomes. Now that I've got still extra money left over, which I think I have 9 million from what I've saved on Mahomes to Josh Allen remaining, I am going to upgrade that to Demario Davis, who is playing as good a football for the linebacker position as anybody in the league. And his cap hit is all of $7.6 million this year, which is truly remarkable. I mean, this guy has been around for a long time and is still playing at this type of level. And yet, usually when guys get older, it's harder to bury their money. A lot of the players on our list, when you look at it, it's usually guys who just signed their contracts and are still a great deal, but won't be in a couple of years. But Davis has been around. Probably linebackers are the best value. I think linebackers and tight ends have become the best value, where if you pay one, a lot of times you are still going to be in good shape for what you get bang for buck wise. Like I mentioned about Hockenson, I mean, he could lead the team with Jefferson having been out. He lead the team in receptions and yards and everything, and they're paying him $5 million on the salary cap. And the same with Demario Davis. I mean, 7.6 million for an elite player at linebacker. That is as good of a deal as you're going to find in the NFL.
Yeah, no, for sure. He took a big like team friendly discount too. So there's definitely a lot of value sitting on that contract. He could have gone to Chicago and got one of those big deals or something, but he was like, "Nah, I'm good. I'm gonna retire $1." So definitely one of my favorite players. I love those hometown hero guys that just stick around. All right, cornerback. I just took a page out of your book. I looked up the top cornerback or the contracts for all the cornerbacks because I originally had DJ Reed at 7.97. And that left my total salary cap at 80.88. So I texted you before. I was like, I'm rounding down. I'm seeing if I can make this work. I couldn't get DJ Reed to fit. And then I ended up going to Rasul Douglas, who was at 840K against the Bills right now. But I'm going to upgrade there because when I moved from Reed to Douglas, that left about 7 mil on the table there. So I'm going to go with Charvarius Ward for the 49ers, who is under the radar because this dude was undrafted, was traded for I think it was like a player swap, like a camp swap of Charvarius Ward for someone to Dallas or something, but was a monster for the Chiefs for years. I remember I was doing the All-22 on Jordan Love's first start in Kansas City, and everyone's ripping on Jordan Love. And I'm like, Charvarius Ward put Devontae Adams in a box in that game. And then he's gone to the Niners, and it's been the perfect fit because he's this big physical corner. The Niners have this incredible pass rush. He only has to cover for like 3 seconds. He's awesome at the catch point. He's been one of the best corners in the NFL this year, so I can sneak him in there. His cap hit is just 6.4 million. And again, a guy that probably got underpaid because he was, an undrafted guy and doesn't have the best 40 time and all that stuff, but he's a hell of a corner.
You and I are very much thinking in the same ways here because I went with DJ Reed for just under 8 million. Great deal for him. And Ward was another guy that I considered for this as well. Now, the question is, you can answer this one for me. I have a little bit of space left over from that initial decision. I guess maybe, Mahomes is taken away from his team because I've been able to upgrade quite a few times here. I have enough to upgrade to Denzel Ward. Now, the question is, should I do that? I have a ton of respect for DJ Reed, maybe benefits from Sauce Gardner being on the other side, but I don't think that that's really it. I mean, I think he's just a great player, and that's why people struggle to move the ball against the New York Jets. So should I upgrade? should I just keep what I have and maybe we'll get a more expensive kicker that's more trustworthy or something? We'll sign the best long snapper there is with the extra dollars, or should I upgrade to the premier Denzel Ward?
Well, yeah, you definitely don't want to get stuck with a rookie Carlson or something like that as your kicker. We've both been down that road. I would. I think Ward is, we both picked Wards, right? So now I'm like spinning around. Denzel Ward is a little bit more scheme proof. I think if you want him to really go, bump and run man coverage with someone's number one wide receiver, I think he's a little bit more equipped to do that, but it's really not much of a difference there. DJ Reed is incredible. But yeah, I would make the upgrade. I mean, if you flipped Ward and put him, in that spot as the number 2 corner on the Jets, it's probably even better than what DJ Reed's doing. So yeah, I would do that.
Yeah, and the gap's not that bad. I wonder how this would have turned out differently if we did average annual salary instead of cap hit, because now that's not how the game's played. That's not how the NFL is. So I agreed with the decision to go cap hit, but it's really interesting about a lot of these players, including Denzel Ward, that the main takeaway is this year it is a phenomenal deal for them, and this year only. And that's, with Cleveland losing Deshaun Watson, and now they got to try to compete. And it's like, well, this defense is going to be hard to keep together because all of a sudden, like, Denzel Ward's going to be a lot more expensive and so forth. And they're going to have to do a lot in order to deal with that. But yeah, I'll make that upgrade then. And my team is incredible. It's like all superstars.
Yeah.
So there's guys out there. There are Black Friday deals to be had, or at least there's some really talented salary cap people in the National Football League who allow your teams to stay on the field.
Yes, absolutely. So why don't let's just read back our teams just for anybody that joined in late or whatever. I have Patrick Mahomes, Raheem Mostert, AJ Brown, Dalton Schultz, Morgan Moses, Trey Hendrickson, Blake Cashman, and Shavarius Ward. You read yours.
And I have Josh Allen, Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, TJ Hawkinson, Trent Williams, Jeffrey Simmons, Demario Davis, and Denzel Ward. I feel like I went like a little more chalk. Like you fought harder for it than I did. I was like, who's the guy who just signed his contract and is amazing? Boop. And you're right. I did just pull up overthecap.com and sorted it by cap hits. That was pretty much all I did.
Yeah. Well, you're going to have to cut half your players in like 2 years. So that's probably the difference between your team and my team. Because all your guys' contracts are going up. I was looking for a little bit more value, but yeah, your team would probably beat mine, I think.
My flag flies forever, buddy. Championship. They can't take the rings away from us.
Yeah, but you make a good point. Like, that's what the NFL's doing. Like, they're making the cap where it just doesn't freaking matter for some of these teams. So absolutely. I mentioned earlier though, the Texans. I have a bunch of Texans I thought about here. I obviously had Blake Cashman and Schultz on my list. I mentioned Denzel Perriman. Devin Singletary was a running back I looked at initially. He's at like 2.6 million. Really has reestablished himself as a good running back. I liked him in Buffalo. He's been huge for them these last couple of weeks. One of the best jump cuts in the league. And then George Fant was an incredible pickup late in the preseason. He's been playing right tackle all year long. He's been playing so well that they took the guy that they just signed to a big contract, Howard. They just put him at guard in the meantime because they're like, Fant's been so good at tackle from week 1 in an emergency situation because their guys were getting hurt, that he's just held on to that job. He's getting paid like nothing, I think. And then Steven Nelson is a veteran corner that's been a great value for them. He's just been a really steady, like high-end number 2 for years. He's really cheap. And then Jimmy Ward was a safety that DeMeco Ryans was able to attract, has played for the Niners. I don't think he's having the most amazing year. Like, he's probably getting up there in age and slowing down a little bit, but I thought he would get paid a lot more than 2 years, $12 million that he got in Houston. So you could kind of see the signs of it in Houston if you were really following some of these moves for the last couple of years, like that their front office was actually, kind of building this thing up in a fun way. And it's obviously now that they have a quarterback, it's like, front and center. So I do want to give that front office credit. Like, it's not a group that we talk about much and we kind of trashed them for years. It's like, no, actually they're running the ship pretty damn well, not to mention their draft picks this year. So just a big shout out.
Yeah, I think what it shows you is that there's still, and the Robert Woods they picked up and so forth.
Mhm.
Like there's still these deals to be had when you go into free agency. And probably, as always, the second or third tier of free agents is where you get most of the best contracts, where it's guys who've slipped through the
Mhm.
cracks a little bit and you're able to pick them up. I mean, I wouldn't have told you that Jordan Hicks would be a great signing for the Vikings 2 years ago, but he was. And they pay him
Mhm.
barely anything, and he's been their green dot player. He's been really effective. I mean, was decent last year, but really effective so far this year. And that was another one where you went, oh, Jordan Hicks signed somewhere. Who cares? Move on. Like when they're
Mhm.
doing the sports update on sports radio, oh, and the Vikings signed Jordan Hicks, move along. Like no one cares. And yet it turns out to be something big. I marvel at how the Philadelphia Eagles have worked their salary. They don't have a single player with a cap number higher than 15 million this year. And this goes under the category of that will change, but they were able to bring back Darius Slay at an $11 million cap hit. Jason
Mhm.
Kelsey, maybe the best offensive lineman not named Trent Williams in the NFL, has a $10 million cap hit. I mean, AJ Brown this year, as we mentioned, is only at $8 million. They have worked it out so perfectly in their window. It's going to take a lot of work to keep that team together, but they're the best team in the NFC, arguably. And they have worked that magic to keep everybody's numbers down.
I'm so curious to see what that team looks like in 3 years. So curious. It'll be fun to, like, think back on this conversation and, like, they're gonna be, like, $500 million over the cap in 3 years, but god, that roster is great right now, and I'm exaggerating that number slightly. Um, alright, let's get on to another interesting topic for the show. That was a ton of fun, by the way. I love that. Um, the 6 seed and the 7 seed in the NFC are wide open right now. Wide open. You have the Seattle Seahawks and the Minnesota Vikings are both 6-5. But as it's been, or the Seahawks are officially 6-6 now after playing yesterday. But as it's been documented, the Seattle Seahawks upcoming schedule is at the Dallas Cowboys, at the San Francisco 49ers, the Philadelphia Eagles. They will be touchdown plus underdogs in all of those games. And then a little bit easier, but at Tennessee, Pittsburgh, and at Arizona to wrap things up. And then you have the Vikings, who do have a pretty favorable schedule, but playing with a backup quarterback right now. So I wanted to ask you kind of who do you think is most likely to, get to the end of this race and is sitting in the 6 and 7 seeds? I want to let you start.
So you had it right the first time. The Seahawks are 6-5. So they were 6-4 before yesterday. Now 6-5.
Got it.
Uh,
Got it.
and so the Vikings and Seahawks are even with each other. Yeah. So even like a week ago, I would have been like, there's no race for the NFC. These teams have it locked up. But then the losses by the Vikings and the Seahawks and the win by the Packers have put them a little bit in the crosshairs. Also, the win by the Los Angeles Rams, who remain in this discussion. And remember, the Rams were dealing with the quarterback injury and so forth.
Mhm.
And Matthew Stafford got popped hard in that game, but he played well, and that team is not too bad. And you mentioned the
Yeah.
schedule. This is what it often comes down to, right? In a race like this that's close, is who has the easiest schedule, who has the most meltdowns. And the Tampa Bay Bucks surprisingly have a pretty darn easy schedule, depending on how you look at it. Maybe it's just not
Mhm.
possible for them to have an easy schedule because they're not a good team, but they could put themselves in this conversation. And part of the reason is that they have a tiebreak over the Minnesota Vikings for beating the Vikings in week 1. So if the Vikings and Bucks both ended up at 8-9, the Bucks would get that spot and not the Vikings. So there can't be a meltdown there. Seattle and Geno Smith dealing with the injury. Their offensive line was struggling like that. I mean, maybe it's never as bad as it looks when you get blown out, but it looked pretty bad. And it looked like Geno was extremely uncomfortable in that game. And if that's what it's going to be, where Geno Smith is banged up and kind of looking like maybe a backup quarterback over the last, I don't know, number of games. I'm not saying he's played at that level, but it hasn't been what people hoped for in Seattle, which was that he was going to be their franchise guy. And heck, if he was, he would have been on our list. His cap hit's only $10 million this year, but there was a reason why they didn't give him like the 40 million. You're our guy, locked in, the Daniel Jones deal, because it was always possible that he would slip. Every one of these teams are flawed. I'm sure that you're, buying another cheesehead hat and thinking that the Packers are going to roll up here. And they might. I mean, they're playing better and better. They seem to be an ascending team. The Vikings are hard to predict because they have a backup quarterback starting. And the Josh Dobbs story has been really fun. The guy shows up out of nowhere, wins some games. We saw a little more of the shortcomings against Denver. I thought he still played pretty well in that game. But as they go against teams that you think are automatic victories, are they really, if you're starting Josh Dobbs? Because he could always turn the ball over 4 times and you lose a game that you're not supposed to lose against Chicago, against Vegas, against maybe Cincinnati. I don't know. Like, if that one's going to be a hard one to lose against Jake Browning if he's starting there, but still. And then there's 2 more games left against Detroit and a game against the Packers that could determine that spot potentially. I think the Vikings should be very worried about the Green Bay Packers coming from behind with the way that Jordan Love looks, but also they got it together on defense. And that's where I had been thinking, all right, well, the Packers, even if they have a decent offense, their defense is going to be so atrocious that they're just going to, fall apart. But it has been legit since that Vikings game. It's almost like I joked around because I saw your question to my mailbag request, and I actually did put it in the mailbag. I did put it in the mailbag.
You did.
And I said that they had, after the loss of the Vikings, they had a come to Lombardi moment there on defense. And it seems like they made major changes, and now they're pressuring opposing quarterbacks. Like that game is suddenly scary for the Vikings. So this race could get very, very tight as we go into the final weeks.
Yeah, I mean, that Packers D line, as I've said, is one of the best in the league. And I'm a big line play guy. And even if you have a questionable defensive coordinator and you've got a bunch of backups in the secondary, if you're not giving Jared Goff any time to throw, and you got Rashawn Gary and Kenny Clark playing so much better since we called him out on this show, like literally the last 2 weeks, he's flipped a switch. Devonta Wyatt, Preston Smith's been good since I called him out on this show. Like, they're stepping it up on the D line. And their schedule's very easy. They play, honestly, the Chiefs. I'm not going to say they're going to beat the Chiefs, but I wouldn't have said they were going to beat the Lions, right? They have the Chiefs at home, who can't catch a pass right now, who all of the Chiefs games have been close this year for the most part, other than the blowout in the Bears. But they're a team that keeps things within a score. So I think it's a winnable game, so to speak, on Sunday night, Lambeau. But let's assume they lose that game. Then they go at the Giants. They host the Bucks. They go at the Panthers, at the Vikings, and then Chicago in Lambeau. They're potential favorites in every one of those games. If you look at the way the Packers are playing offensively right now, you also got to consider 2 of their losses that they've had this year came on field goal botches. They would have beat the Broncos. If they don't shank a field goal, they would have beat the Steelers without the 4 points they left on the board in that game. Or at least it was a missed PAT made it so that they couldn't force overtime with a field goal. So it was kind of a 4-point swing there. But they've been right in all these games. And now Jordan Love, man, you got to talk about Jordan Love, where, I mean, everybody's writing this dude off after like 6 weeks. And I'm just like, I'm a Jordan Love guy. I don't want to have any of these huge statements or anything, but like, what are we doing writing this guy off when he's out there with literally the youngest team in the league? A bunch of rookie wide receivers. Christian Watson, the guy that we saw on Thursday, that has not been Christian Watson this year. The dude has not caught a contested catch like all year. And then all of a sudden, over 3 days, he learns how to play through contact. But the offensive lines had their issues. They've settled down there. I thought Matt LaFleur had the best game he's had as a play caller in a long, long time. And I've used to have a lot of respect for LaFleur, but that guy hasn't been there for a while. But I think he's now comfortable with what Love likes and what these receivers like. And they're starting to kind of figure out what the hell they want to be offensively. So, man, you look at that. You talked about the defense. By the way, Jair Alexander and Eric Stokes did not play against the Detroit Lions. They're hopeful that both those guys will be back soon. I think that's a big reason they traded Rasul Douglas, is they've had this big dilemma between like they have 3 outside corners and one of them had to play in the slot and it never really worked out. They like Eric Stokes. He can't stay healthy, but man, I'm trying to, not buy the Kool-Aid too much, but I honestly think they're the favorite to get the 6th seed at this point because the Vikings, I just don't trust on a week-to-week basis right now. And maybe that's because I'm a Minnesota sports fan and all of my other, I'm a Wolves fan, a Twins fan, technically a Wild fan, and I just know how things go in Minnesota. The second you have expectations, it all just blows away like the wind. So maybe that's clouding my judgment a little bit. But I don't even know if the Vikings are going to beat the Bears on Monday night. I don't. And if that happens, if the Bears win, it's like I think they'll probably pass the Vikings. And I think the Seahawks are going to be sitting there at 6-8 at least. And then can they win 3 straight to get to 9-8? I don't trust that. They have the tiebreaker over the Saints. Should the Saints fall to 9-8, they would have the tiebreaker in that situation. So I really think the Packers might do this thing. The other team I want to talk about real quick is the Atlanta Falcons. I know we all hate Arthur Smith, and I get it, but the Falcons are 4-6. Their upcoming schedule is the Saints at the Jets, the Bucks at the Panthers, the Colts at the Bears, and at the Saints. Those are extremely winnable games for the Falcons, who are 4-6, who I think have the most, I'm not going to say the most, but they have a lot of offensive firepower and an average defense, and they have the tiebreaker over Green Bay. So I would say the most likely teams to get the 6 and 7 seed. Here's my final answer after all of that. We're playing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I'm going to go Packers and Vikings are the 6 and 7 seeds. But I do think the Falcons would be the team I'm very curious to see if they might be a team that steals a spot either from the Packers or the Vikings. Because if both Green Bay and Atlanta get to 9-8, then the Falcons would be in.
First, I want to commend you on waiting this long to talk with glee about Jordan Love. So good for you. That took a lot of restraint, I think, for you to do that. But no, with any quarterback, we're always trying to do this week to week. Is he great? Is he terrible? Should they get rid of him? Should they pay him? And sometimes through full seasons, we don't even know. And there's no better example than just recently with Geno Smith or with Daniel Jones, where both of them were kind of mysteries last year. Both played really well. Daniel Jones wins a playoff game, played really well in that game. Both of them are in big contracts. And now you're sitting here going, well, those weren't very good decisions, were they? I mean, I'm not saying Seattle should have bailed because what else were they going to do at quarterback? There was nobody to draft or whatever. Still, though, like it's very hard to evaluate on a week-to-week basis. And someone like Jordan Love, who has never started before outside of a couple of just appearances for the Packers, how are we supposed to say what is really there? Also, how are we supposed to say that what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is really what Jordan Love is? Or is it matchups? Or is it just, look, I mean, he throws the ball as far as he can and Christian Watson catches it and he gets 53 yards and he didn't really do anything other than just throw the ball really hard, really high and far, which is a whole nother discussion about how deep passing is just a receiver stat, but that's a different conversation. I mean, Jordan Love has been doing that all season long and people haven't been really coming down with the ball, and then they do in a game. And that's kind of a random thing. I thought, though, him playing on time, that's what I'm always watching for is, does somebody hit their back foot, hitch, throw? Like that, the slant that he throws for a touchdown, though two guys almost ran into each other, but it was on time. It was like right as he's hitting that back foot. Those are things that I didn't really see from him early in the season in this way of consistency, which makes me think that he's getting on the same page with receivers. He's getting the offense down. So they do look like a different team on both sides of the football from even what I saw at Lambeau Field when I made that trip a few weeks ago down there to cover that game. So I think that the Packers have a great chance to make the playoffs. The team that could just be a thorn in everybody's side here seems to be the Tampa Bay Bucks, because if Green Bay can't win that game against Tampa Bay, suddenly
Mhm.
things become a lot more dicey. And Tampa Bay they're a weird team where they can play well and they have a good defense and they can surprise you. Mike Evans can go off. They should win that game, but there's always that, and the same thing goes for the Vikings schedule. There's always that thing in like, okay, well, where's the game that I didn't expect? I actually kind of expected, I didn't pick Denver, but I talked about leading up to that game. Like this one might be the one where Dobbs regresses a little bit. So I wasn't shocked that they lost that game or that bad luck kind of comes back to haunt them. But with the Vikings and a backup quarterback starting, the range of outcomes here is wider. So
Mhm.
they could roll with Josh Dobbs and just beat the heck out of Chicago, and they play Vegas out of their bye week. I mean, Cincinnati with who knows at
Right.
quarterback. And then you go into those last 3 games thinking just get 1 out of 3 and you're in the playoffs basically. But now you don't know because if he has a bad game, which he hasn't really had one yet, as a guy that's been inconsistent throughout his career, that could derail this entire thing. I would agree with you, though, that if I'm picking the two, it's probably Green Bay and the Vikings to make those 6 and 7 seeds. With the only team I think, I mean, you've got Atlanta is interesting. That schedule is wild. But I also have no respect, as you mentioned, for Arthur Smith. So
Yeah.
I wonder about Tampa Bay. If Tampa Bay could be that sneaky team that all of a sudden we're like, wait a minute, I thought they were dead, and now they're here, and those tiebreakers could play a role for the Vikings as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And the Rams, I like the Rams too, but you got Cleveland, Baltimore, and San Fran are still on the schedule. So they're, it's just harder. The schedule's just harder for them, but it's going to be interesting. Vikings and Packers play New Year's night, which is going to be a freaking party in Minneapolis. I can say that. Looking forward to that. I will be there, and it's going to be great. We did have a couple more topics. We are now over an hour. I think we can just kind of gloss over these on the way out here. The other topic we had here is the NFC a 3-team race? Basically, are the Detroit Lions legit? I say yes. The Lions defense is a problem, and Jared Goff is regressing these last couple of weeks. He's looking more like the old Jared Goff.
Yeah, my thing is the defensive lines of the 3 teams, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Dallas.
Mhm.
If they play Detroit in a playoff game, they will murder Jared Goff. And Jared Goff, when he runs, kind of reminds me of a giraffe. Like, I think he might have a decent top speed if he ever got to it, but it's like I see things moving, but it's not going there. You know who Jared Goff, the most comparable quarterback to Jared Goff is Alex Smith. Okay, Smith was faster for sure if
Mhm.
like he got going, if he decided to run. But if Alex Smith was rolling out and trying to throw on the run, the ball just went straight into the ground. I have no idea why. Like there is no ability. Like does he practice it with a tire in his backyard? Like roll out and throw.
Mhm.
He cannot move and throw the football at the same time. And I feel like it kills a lot of potential big plays because opposing teams, any pressure on him, the ball is basically just thrown into the ground. And I tweeted out his stats under pressure since 2018. His highest quarterback rating under pressure is like 67 or something.
Mm.
Since then, he is a bottom third, if not like bottom 5 passer under pressures consistently year after year. And look who you're playing. Is Micah Parsons or Nick Bosa or all Eagles not going to get after him? Of course they are, even with a decent offensive line there. So I don't trust the Lions in the playoffs. I don't trust Aaron Glenn either, who always gets talked about as if he's doing a great job on defense, but yet their defense is always bad. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 3-team race for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, the difference in defensive lines is ridiculous. I mean, I like Aiden Hutchinson, but he hasn't been the guy he was in the first 6 weeks of the season. And even outside of that, if he is that guy, no one's afraid of that pass rush. Just double team Aiden Hutchinson. You can leave everybody one-on-one. You're fine. And the secondary is not very good. They've been one of the worst defenses in the league this year, at least in the last couple months. So Lions fans have been so mad at me. I've raised my hand up. I said I was too low on them coming in. I had them as like a 8 and 9 team. I sold the hype, and I was still wrong. They are definitely, better than that. But they've continued to come at me as I've said they're not a Super Bowl team, and I think that has very much come to the forefront now as Green Bay and Baltimore and even Seattle. Like, who the hell is Detroit beaten this year other than the Chiefs in a game where the receivers gifted points away and Kelsey and Chris Jones weren't playing? Those weren't the Kansas City Chiefs. So yeah,
and they were
it's a 3-team race.
That was the original version of the Kansas City drops right there.
Mm-hmm.
Just to the point in the comments, I know Alex Smith was a better runner, was definitely more fast at running, but go back and watch Alex Smith anytime a play broke down and he tried to throw off platform. Disaster, total disaster. In fact, they lost the playoff game against the Giants because of that. You got to go back to his San Francisco days, but they pressured him and he couldn't do anything. It's just hard to believe that they could go deep in the playoffs if you can't play under pressure effectively.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why they moved on from him. All right. On the way out here, Matthew, what are you thankful for from the NFL this year?
Oh, well, thankful for football in general. Yeah, I can't say parody, by the way. I can't say parody. I think that if there's anything, it's that there's a lot of teams in the AFC that have been different than I thought they were going to be. And I think what I'm always thankful for halfway through the NFL season is how many things change what we think on a week-to-week basis and how different it turns out. I remember this so specifically. I used to get Sports Illustrated in the mail, as everybody else used to do when I was a kid. And I remember their preview magazine and looking at the projected standings. And one year I was like, you know what? I'm going to hang on to this one. And then like toward the end of the season, I'm going to pull it back out and look at it. And it was so wrong. It was just so wildly, insanely wrong. And you know what? I bet if we looked at our projected standings, they'd be pretty wrong too. And specifically in the AFC, did we see the Houston Texans coming? Like, probably not. Did we see Buffalo struggling? I mean, I know that you thought that they might, but like a lot of people were putting them in the Super Bowl and maybe they'll still make it. Kansas City, I would not have thought that Mahomes could be penetrable with bad receivers, but if they have it bounce off their face, then that will happen. So I think that just in general, there's so much to still be decided. We don't feel like there's teams running away, and it's just been a really dramatic and compelling season. I'm not thankful for all the quarterback injuries, but it has been fun. And I have to say, just for myself, very selfishly, I'm thankful for Josh Dobbs, because when Kirk went down, I thought my YouTube views, my clicks, my podcast downloads are about to go in the tank. And Josh Dobbs, at least for now, has saved the season. So that's been
Josh Dobbs was on my list too.
There you
go. Josh Dobbs
yeah.
written down. He's just such a fun storyline in a year that's needed it. Yeah. Selfishly as a Packers fan, I'm thankful that the NFC is a load of ass. I'm thankful that we get a quick turnaround from these games. We get to watch the big Ohio State, Michigan tomorrow, and then hopefully some better NFL action on Sunday. And another thing I'm thankful for is that I don't have to play quarterback behind some of the pass rushers in the NFL this year. I mean, I don't remember a year where you've got, the Browns, the Niners, the Cowboys. I mean, the Eagles were like all anybody wanted to talk about coming into the year, and they're like the 5th or 6th best pass rush in the league. So I'm thankful that I don't have to stand in there and take hits against some of the pass rushes in the league. And just to be sentimental, I'm thankful that we met up and started this show. This has been a ton of fun. I'm thankful for all you guys joining us normally on Tuesdays, but here on Friday for Hot Routes. Anything else you got before we get out of here, Matthew?
No, I totally agree with you. I have really had a lot of fun every week getting together with you and talking about the entire league. And I think also just both of us being independent content content creators. That's the word for That's what we are. I'm a little bit of a weird hybrid thing, but that's what we are. So what we rely on is our audiences, the people who show up to live streams and who download podcasts and who click on articles to allow us to do these dream jobs. So that's always going to be far and away number one forever for me, is the fans who show up and want to hear us talk about football. So most appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely. As someone said to me on Twitter today, I think he thought it was an insult. He said, just stay being a YouTube GM. And I said, absolutely, I will. That is the plan, my friend, because I couldn't be any more thankful for it. So thank you for joining the show, Matthew, and everybody in the chat. Everybody go check out Matthew's podcast, the book, and we're out of here. Have a great Thanksgiving weekend, and we'll see you guys. No show this upcoming Tuesday. We're kind of threading the needle here between the holiday, but we'll be back in like 10 days or whenever that is, 6 Eastern right here on the channel. So peace out, everybody.